Hi, this is Scott Miller. Welcome to my Top Performance blog. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Stephen Jenkinson, who is the founder of the Orphan Wisdom School. And it's a place where people are yearning for a deeper life, one that embraces all aspects of what it means to be human. Stephen is a teacher, a storyteller, and an author. In 2015, he penned the award-winning book, Die Wise, which is how I first became aware of his work and perspective, and it is focused on the way our culture addresses both death and dying. More recently, his book, Coming of Age, was released in 2018, and it's a call, an impassioned call for raising a generation of elders who can guide us in our stewardship of this planet and our species. And I'm super grateful that Stephen has agreed to take some time out to speak with me today. Hello, Stephen.
How do you do, Scott? And of course, like you, I'm so busy and so preoccupied with so many things. It was all I could do to steal the time away to do this with you.
Well, you know, really, I do appreciate it because I do know that you're speaking and teaching constantly, and your message really resonated with me. I first came across it, as I said, in your book, Die Wise, and then have since watched all the videos that I can possibly see online. And I was thinking in particular that I wanted to talk about, given that our meeting is occurring at a time when our countries are in lockdown due to the outbreak of the coronavirus, about your work, and in particular the implications for it on the subject of death and dying. I'm wondering, to start off the conversation, how you see the North American response to COVID-19.
Well, I'm not sure that there is anything like a concerted response to it. I think what you're looking at is a grim phenomenon where 5% of what we're contending with is the virus, if you will. 95% is the hyperreactivity around the virus, and that's most of what we're engaged with. That's what most people are talking about. Those are the subject lines. You know, who said what about, and I don't know, is it any different from Star Search or you know, do you know what I mean? Is the way it's going any different? In other words, has this changed anything at all? My take on it is utterly and heartbreakingly no. I think what we're looking at is ourselves again. You would think at some point that just the grind of maintaining a world-defeating way of life would itself reduce us to some kind of fundamental inability to proceed. That's what I would count on. It's not a lot to hope for, but I would count on it. And you know, the savagery of this arrangement is, this is going to sound awful, but the real savagery here is not how many people have died of this virus, which is not many by any standard. Rather, the savagery is how many haven't died. Because I'm fairly sure that if the original estimates, if we had begun to approach them in any way, shape, or form, there would be a degree of seismic alteration to the regime. And sadly, nothing of the kind has transpired. And tragically, we are not anywhere close to the brinksmanship that should bring us to our senses. And within, choose your time frame, 2 weeks, 2 months, a year, what will this be but a sequence of vignettes about how people coped with ennui and with boredom?
Instead of?
Well, instead of, I mean, this is a big launch, this little thing you've just asked me here. But I'll constrain myself and simply say, I imagine, I hear that the waters in the canals in Venice are running clear. This is a direct consequence of the fact that the likes of you and I are not hoarding our way over to Italy in the spring and exercising our right to globalize. In other words, the world is beginning to uncoil and to revive itself in direct proportion to our defeat. And I just wish our defeat was thorough, but it's not even cosmetic.
We're still preoccupied with the bells and whistles, and we're really missing the point here.
Well, first of all, I should have begun by saying, to say anything, sometimes you have to generalize.
Yeah.
There's a lot of casualties in generalization, of course. The exceptions are the first casualty, right? And the sense of, you know, the broad swath and things. But having said that, that caveat in place, I don't know what we are doing. I do have a grim and dreadful sense that the hankering after something like a normal life will be the prevailing response when the quote all clear whistle blows. And the irony is that that whistle will be false. It won't be all clear. And I'm not speaking as an amateur epidemiologist when I say that. I'm saying that, you know, the wish that everybody confers upon everybody else now to be safe and stay safe. Well, this is illusion. This was illusion before the advent of this virus. There was no safety. There's no safety now. I don't think anybody would contend with that. And there won't be any safety in 15 months and it has nothing to do with the virus. It's our way of willing ourselves towards the next day. Our sense of sheer momentum forbids the willingness to think a different thought about all of this. And that's the amazing thing about right now. I mean, you can hear that kind of plea that's in my voice about it. I can feel it rising when I think about it again.
And I can feel it as you speak.
Oh yeah, so we're arrested now, and it's not our idea, right? And quote unquote, we haven't done anything wrong. If that's true, then this is not punishment. If we have done something wrong, then the old mythic understanding that we're paying for something begins to hold some kind of water. You have to decide what your orientation to life is, right? But whatever it is, whatever the mythic and poetic sensibility that you bring to bear upon this thing to try to get an understanding of what world are you inhabiting right now, certainly this much is true. We have no momentum to speak of. 60 or whatever it is, 65% of people are, quote, staying at home. The lack of that momentum is perhaps the first time in the life of any living person right now to, outside of retreat centers, which are a dubious achievement, or life coaching sessions or whatever it is, that your momentum that drags you involuntarily to the next autonomic response is no more. And the amazing thing is the opportunity to engage with a certain fact of freedom is there. We are free from momentum. And it is the one freedom that dominant culture North Americans seem to fear most.
Because why, Stephen? Why do we fear that? I'm really taken by your notion that here we have an opportunity per se, but that we may be missing it. Why is that?
Maybe. Yeah, not maybe. Let's not equivocate. All the signs are. If you just scan across the hopeless, godless YouTube thing. I'm not into the other stuff. I barely know how the YouTube works. This is a miracle that you and I have connected here, given my troglodyte status. But as I've done so, and maybe it's not the best survey to exercise, but what I pay attention to is the language that people employ. That's kind of my stock and trade anyway. And the language tells you an awful lot about the way people are thinking, whether they're telling you their thoughts or not. You could say that vocabulary is kind of inadvertent confession. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. And I have some practice at it and some at least moderate skill. And here's what comes to me. People who look like you and me on this continent began our life here in flight. I mean, that's our creation story. And the unauthorized history of America is the subject of my school. That's why I created it. Because I only had the authorized version to contend with, and it wasn't much. And by and large, it was a set of very useful fabrications, okay, and a lot of stuff left out. So the notion that we came here to better ourselves is tertiary in terms of any significance at all. The principal thing we're doing was running. So the first thing to observe is the people who ran were the people who could run. So they weren't the worst off, number one. So there's some kind of beneficiary to the regime that they were fleeing. Number two, what age or demographic do you think were represented by the people who came across? Do you think we brought our elders with us? I promise you that wasn't true. You know, the able-bodied made it over, right? Okay, not unlike this virus. Anybody my age today is dying from this virus, would have died of the Middle Passage as well. If you take those two things together, people in flight who are convincing themselves that they have other motivations, who are elderless and therefore rudderless, are the principal, their vision of life is architected by what they fear most, what they're trying to escape. And the first sequence of acts they engage in when they get here is to recreate the scenario that they were trying to escape. Politically, economically, everything. The notion that it was a new world, to ever use the phrase, is a monstrous trespass on history and on the people that we found here when we got here. And just ask them how we performed in our search after freedom, right? From that day to this day. You know, as the cagiers among them will say, I know this is new for you, but we've been contending with viruses for an awful long time. Basically since you got here. True enough. So what do I think's going on? I think it's a kind of, you know, what the psychiatrists will call repetition compulsion, right? That you recreate the trauma in order to give yourself something overt to respond to feel that you're mobilized. But in so doing, the trauma is revisited as if you were the time of life when it first came to you. You see, and our understanding of time is one of our principal dilemmas, if you can call it an understanding. I'm imitating it with my hands as I'm saying it. So our understanding of time is progressive, sequential, and unidirectional, and basically linear, right? That's the one that we're working with all the time.
Yes.
That's what allows you and I to not quite get our time straight about when we're supposed to record this and all of that, right? So past, present, future, it's built right into our grammar. Our grammar is intolerant of any other vision of time except a linear and progressive one. And we're absolutely persuaded that the past is gone and the future is not yet. That means the future is oncoming. That means anything that's ever been is relegated to the lost, which of course is one of the synonyms that people use for someone who's died. Okay, so our time problem is manifest in our tremendous fear of death, because you have a manifest fear of disappearance, and your understanding of time is guaranteeing that you will disappear from among us. And it's manifest in our problem with elderhood or with agedness, right? That the aged among us are one step away from oblivion. And we keep our distance from them as long as we're able to, and from their appearance as well. And is it not Shakespearean, virtually, that of all the places where the coronavirus could have concentrated itself and done its particular work, so-called continuing care facilities is the principal place where that's happening? Well, do you know why? I submit to you, here's why. It's because there's such a thing as continuing care facilities. If you want to read the news, the real news here, it's not that we, quote, failed to care for our elderly and our most vulnerable population. It's that we segregated them in the name of taking care of them. And that segregation has come full circle, scorpion's tail fashion, to haunt us as we watch through the window at our elderly mother passing away with no physical touch.
We push these people, we've segregated that group of people from us because we're in constant flight from this reality that death is there, it's imminent. Help me understand this.
Yeah. If that were true, we wouldn't be in flight. If death were imminent and if it were present, we'd have a different capacity, a different orientation. This is, of course, really familiar ground for me. And you know what happens when you walk across familiar ground, you tend not to look at it. So let me slow down and suggest the following. You and I are probably both old enough to remember a time when everybody knew there was enough oil in the ground forever for everyone. Okay. Even though there's that little bit of an oil crisis in your country there, I think it was in the 70s, still, by and large, everybody knew there was enough oil. Now, how could you tell that we knew it? Answer is, by how we behaved. It wasn't a discrete object of knowledge that we had. Okay. It was evident in our decision-making, in our buying patterns and so forth, and in the legislation patterns from one government to the next and so forth, right? Now, I never said it was true that there was enough oil. I simply said that we knew that there was. So, you know, I'm using the word know here somewhat arbitrarily. Okay. So it was never true, but we knew it anyhow, and the knowledge is self-evident in the way we conducted ourselves. So take the word oil out of my scenario I just described to you, and put in the word die or death. And then follow the exact same scenario and ask yourself whether or not everyone knows they're going to die. If you ask them, they'll probably tell you yes, except for a few new age people who have other plans. But for the rest of us, we probably knuckle under, you know, with some reluctance. But if you investigate the way of life that would seem to corroborate that clear, crystal clear declaration,
we don't act that way.
You see no evidence that this is a known thing. You might see evidence that it's a feared thing, that it's a fled from thing, but you won't find basically any sign in the way that life is lived that it's a known thing. And if it were, things would be different. So by and large, what you got is a circumstance in which our mortality is a knowable thing, not much known by us.
And if we did know that, I couldn't help thinking of my grandparents who immigrated from Europe just after the turn of the last century. And my grandmother used to say, she would say when we would come to visit, you know, I want to show you where my money is or my sweaters are. She would say, we say, why, Grandma? And she would say, well, in case the next time you come, I'm not here. And I can remember my father used to joke and he would say, where are you going, Stina? But for her, it seemed like there was a different experience with death. What would we see at the time of COVID-19 if we were not just knowing this, if there were more of what you're describing in our response?
Well, first of all, I don't think we would mistake the COVID-19 onset for an autonomic encounter with our personal mortality. Okay? So I'm saying out loud for anyone who wants to judge me that principally what this virus is not an encounter with our mortality, voluntary or otherwise. This is an encounter with an unsustainable way of life. This is an indictment that's not even doing a good job of masquerading as a personal threat. Because after you got through the, right, wash your hands a lot and, you know, do that thing. And once you figured out who to stay away from, I mean, you basically got it figured out. And now it's just a matter of waiting it out, right?
Mm.
How mortal is that? Okay, so the big dilemma to my mind is this. I was in the death trade for a brief but very intense period of time.
Mm.
I can't claim decades and decades in the trenches, but I saw an awful lot of people die. And I've got no reason to exaggerate what I saw or misrepresent it to you or to anybody else. And so for what it's worth, nobody intended to be a dying person. So nobody was looking for help to die. What they were looking for is help not to die.
Hmm.
Secondarily, what they did constantly was engage in a vocabulary that banished the realities of dying, even as they were referring to them with that vocabulary.
Hmm.
See, should I say that again, or was that?
Say that again.
Sure. How about this? So I'm asked fairly routinely, or so much now, but in the older days I was asked, so did you find that people with a faith-based life or a kind of religious or ethical or spiritual doctrine in some fashion died better than the great unwashed, uneducated knuckle draggers, spiritually speaking?
Hmm.
And of course they were anticipating the answer would be, of course.
Hmm.
And I had to disappoint them, but give them more to talk about by saying, not at all. And they were dumbfounded. And so let me articulate why I thought that never happened. You see, to generalize again, the people who were religiously or spiritually convicted, which is my favorite way of putting it, obtained their convictions from a systematic theology, if you will, that was not predicated on, was not rooted in any of the realities of dying as I came to see them. And I'm not talking about the medicated, hyper-industrialized ways of dying in the big cities. I mean the realities of dying across the human spectrum, okay? Mm-hmm. With the possible exception of very high-end Buddhistic practice. But by and large, what you found is people's conviction rooted in their religion. They brought to dying as a way of contending with and attempting to defeat or at least assuage the realities of dying. Mm. Not as a way of engaging it, learning its ways, and obeying it. You know, the verb to obey doesn't mean to be slavishly submitting. Mm. The verb to obey means to attend to something like listening. That's what parents mean when they say, are you listening to me? That's actually the meaning of obey. Mm. And that's what dying was asking of people. It wasn't doing anything to them. It was their lifelong companion who now was slightly more manifest than any other time. So they take their excuse me, religious sort of limit-free orientation to life and try to contend with what becomes very quickly the ultimate limit, the one you're not going to talk your way around. And all of your talk was contending with, was demonizing basically the realities of dying, see? And as soon as you do that, then you can craft the notion that there's such a thing as sudden death. Because it would appear that when this virus gets a hold of you, that could qualify as suddenish from everything that I've been hearing. Okay, but here's the reality, Scott. It seems to me that if you're a thinking person and you're willing to know things for what they are, there's no such thing as sudden death. That the word sudden, when you apply it to death, is a confession of truancy. It's not a description of the rapidity of the dying. Here's what I mean. Do you know you're going to die? Yes. So when you do, how can it be sudden? So when you say sudden death, you begin to realize you're saying you didn't really think so.
Mm.
You're saying you didn't really take it seriously. You weren't really going along with it. You weren't agreeing to it.
Mm.
You were exercising your options. You were a denizen in the basement of your serenity prayer mania, you see, and you were still fairly sure that you had a vote on this thing. But you never had a vote. And suddenly when nobody asks you your permission on this matter, now it's demonic. And your own president, I mean, he uses the most insane, I mean, we won't even get into it, but the language of the way by which he refers to this virus as if it were some kind of alien from outer space. Like he's listened to War of the Worlds at night, I swear, and then using the language in the morning that comes from that understanding, you see? But
Yes.
of course, what's coronavirus but the most, like a poster child for naturally occurring?
Right.
That's what it is. It's the natural order of things, not something gone haywire.
Right.
It's obeying the rules of life absolutely faithfully, and we might take a lesson or two from it, because of all the life forms on this planet, it seems the human one is the most challenged to show the proper regard and respect for the natural order of things and to find our way in it.
And I'm hearing two things in that. The first one is that if this really isn't about COVID-19 and the death occurring from that, then we should be, if we are in fact literate about our death, then we should be focused on something other than what the media is currently focused on, what the conversations currently are. And we would be acting different given that it's happening right now at the same time. Am I getting this?
More than I'm able to say it, but you know, I'm lucky enough to live on a farm. So I'm looking out at a river right in front of me. It's the same river on the cover of Diewise, actually. And it's very quiet. Okay. And our life is virtually the same now in quote lockdown as it was before the lockdown. It's no different. And I'm not bragging to say it. I know that I'm a lucky one to say it. But what I'm telling you is it's remarkably quiet. It's quiet the way this part of the world hasn't been for probably more than 100, 110 or 20 years. Now, there's something about that that's both haunting and strangely joy-making, that it's still possible that everything's not gone, even though our way of life is bent over backwards to banish it. All it took was an alleged fear of dying, and for the moment at least, a generalized willingness to take orders, as long as it was bolstered by enlightened self-interest, which is where your country's starting to come apart at the seams again, because people are disagreeing now that this is in their best interest, you know, to stay home, obviously.
Right.
Okay. My point is that what the virus is giving us a chance to do is witness firsthand the consequences of our normal, the deleterious and drastic consequences of our normal for this world and for the near future, which is to say, the children that we keep claiming to hold dear. And there's very little evidence that we hold children dear, at least in the West. We fetishize them and we envy them, children, but it's not clear that we hold them dear. Because if we did, then the life lessons that are available to us this very day about the kind of life that we were living that brought us to this moment would be first and foremost in our consideration and holding us to some kind of account. See, as it is now, the principal responsibility is self-preservation and contending with your boredom. You know, and as I said earlier, this will be war stories in no time at all. And just like, where were you at the blackout of thus and so, and it'll be one of those. And the tragedy of that is beyond my ability to express, or my inclination to try to put into words. I know that sounds odd, probably. It sounds even perhaps misanthropic, but I have nothing against humanity, you know. I would like to see it come to call once in a while. And this moment is crafted for us, that our humanity would visit us as a plea, not as an entitlement, as a plea, that we might exercise the humanity that was entrusted to us. And how might we do it? Well, we might just decide we're not going back. You see? Now,
boy, I can feel the pull of that right there, Stephen, the minute you say it.
Yeah, like just, it's gone. Just agree. And even if they offer it back to you, don't take it. It's like a blanket infected with smallpox. It'll keep you warm for 20 minutes, but it'll kill you in 20 days. That's a very good parallel to documented practice in the 19th century regarding trading with native people.
Yeah.
And we're going to be traded with, and the whole pitch will be, you want your stuff back, don't you? You want your security, your sense of well-being back, don't you? You want that sense of personal safety, and that everything's more or less unfolding as it should, right? Like the Desiderata poster, right? That's what you want. It's your right, right? And they took it away from you, and it's a smallpox blanket, man. Because demonstrably, give me another minute, sorry. You've opened a vein here. It's your fault.
I'll take it.
Okay. So it would appear that one of two possibilities exists as terms of the origin of this thing, right? The less popular one is that they had a whole laboratory in that city in China, and somehow, you know, the protocols broke down, whatever it was. That's one thought. The other thought, of course, is that there's this wet market in that city. And in the wet market, cheek by jowl, you have domesticated and wild animals. And it would appear the virus leaps from the wild to the domestic, and from the domestic to the domesticator, and from that person, the vendor, to the public. And here we are today talking about it. If it's the second one, and I have no way of knowing which it is, but if it's the second one, then mythically and poetically, what you got is this. We are contending now, or failing to contend, with the consequences of our incursion into the wild. Period. This is what globalization looks like, my friends. This is what it includes. This is the Russian roulette that you're playing when you put on your Patagonia outfit and head off into the cold blue north, or whatever your vision is of what you're entitled to. You know, the wild runs from us every chance it gets. It retreats, it recoils, it withdraws. That's what it does. You could personalize that, or you could see it perhaps for what it is, which is, it's the wild's attempt to take care of us. You know, and an encounter with the real wild is not an Ansel Adams photograph. The real wild will undo you. So anyway, to summarize what I mean, we have no business in the wild, you see, and our utter refusal to obey the limits that are entrusted to us at birth begin to look like this. This is what we're living through now. And the savage disconsolateness that comes to me when I consider this is how unwilling the general population seems to be to learn the life-affirming lesson of limits, and to operate within those limits, and to not consider them to be insults or futilities or defeats. If we must call them a defeat, call it a defeat at the hands of God, which is not a bad foe to surrender to.
And all of this is tied back to this awareness of not just knowing death, but having it present, our unwillingness to settle for a moment and observe and reflect on where we're at given the coronavirus or whatever, and change our behavior in relationship to it.
Or in a word, sub-frigging mit.
This I think is the hard thing that I see in my interactions with people in social media and as a psychologist, this idea of submitting, because the big debate is, do we stay locked down? Do we open up the economy? Is there a middle way? But none of it seems to exemplify this kind of submission that you're talking about.
Of course not. I mean, that's how it's mainstream. You know, I was teaching a few years ago at a conference about dying, apparently, in New York City, and they called it the art of dying. So, you know, it wasn't about dying. It was about how to transmogrify dying, so it's just another form of self-expression. So instead of the standard 125 beleaguered souls who would come to a teaching about dying, you had 800 or 900 people there to learn how to turn dying into an art form. And I was the second speaker to go on. And the woman who was in front of me is 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning. She had the crowd whipped up pretty good. And she raised her arms, you know, Tony Robbins style. It was an amazing moment. I was right in front of her and it was, well, and she said, folks, we're going mainstream.
I'm intrigued by what you said. So here you've got this big tent revival meeting that everybody's going to survive death, or at least do it in an artful fashion. And then there's Stephen Jenkinson, who in his interviews often admits that he's not the life of the party.
Yeah. That
his message isn't one full of hope in the traditional definition of hope.
No, it's hope free, in fact.
What did you say?
Well, I did get up there and I risked disfavor. And of course, I risked entirely a return engagement. And I basically asked that question. Then I talked at great length, not about dying, but about art. And I said something like this: do you know, art, if it's art and not something you can get at IKEA, it's not decorative. It's prismatic. Okay, by which I mean that art is principally a function, not a thing, and not a personality either. So how does it work? It works the way a prism works. So art takes what is apparently invisible, like the fish's water, and passing through, it becomes visible by virtue of its constituent parts becoming articulate and lucid. That's the principal responsibility, and it's a heavy responsibility of a practicing artist, be they visual or auditory or whatever it is, you know, poetics or whatever it is. But the heavy caveat is the artist must be faithful to that function without any obligation to complement the culture in the act of revealing the culture to itself. Because generally speaking, the culture is disinclined to be too self-aware. You see, because it messes with your capacity for momentum and for self-improvement and for change, and especially the demon growth, you see. So as long as you're growing, as long as you're pitching it as a moral imperative, a personal development moral imperative and so on, and you're imagining that as long as the economy is growing, oh my God, the economy is contracting, and thank God the economy is contracting. But who's going to tolerate that for very long? Okay, so at the risk of just one fable after another, here's another one. You know, I have a band, and I've been touring off and on with the band for several years. We've called the event Nights of Grief and Mystery. So I was out on tour, and I was going into Chicago. We were driving on the highway, And I passed a road sign, the likes of which I passed many times, and you have done too. And the 17 people who are listening to us right now, they've passed the road signs as well. And it said this, black writing on the orange background. So it's pretty hard to miss, but really hard to see. It hit me like it had never hit me before. It was oracular. It was prescient. It was urgent. And it was manifest. And it said, be prepared to stop. And I said to myself out loud, yes, that's the plea now. Be prepared to stop, while stopping is still an option. You see, choose the thing which will otherwise be forced upon you. That was basically it. Well, here we come. It's not, 2 years later, and people are being temporarily forced to stop, you see. Mm-hmm. And the stopping is, it's mandatory now, but it's temporary. Okay. So now the road sign is going to change by virtue of our unwillingness to be defeated by this. So what we're going to do instead is apparently wait to be persuaded. Listen, we've already got a test case. It's called, quote, global warming. Okay, we've already, but the evidence is already there that we are not interested in being persuaded. We are interested only in defeat because of our addiction to victory, you see? Mm-hmm. That's basically our template.
Yeah. Are we addicted to our belief in victory?
Well, just so, yeah, our practice of nominal petty victory.
Yeah.
Whether we exercise it over indigenous people continuously to this day, in terms of our globalization or so-called ecotourism, as if that's any different, or psychic tourism by taking ayahuasca as it suits you, or of course the reinvention of hallucinogenics for people who are dying, and on and friggin' on. So what's your point, man? You're not pleased with anything, obviously. Well, my personal pleasure is irrelevant. What I'm being invited to wonder about by virtue of your very kind invitation is whether that road sign could say anything other than be prepared to stop now. But I believe it's being rewritten as you and I are sitting here talking. It's going to say, be prepared to be stopped. And the next iteration will be no sign, no road.
Yeah. Stephen, I really think that's a great place to stop. And this last metaphor, I'm so grateful that you shared it, because that does seem to be what all of this invites. It seems to be what life invites us to do. Yeah. Be prepared to stop. Yeah. And I'm super grateful that you would spend the time with me, and I hope we can have additional conversations in the future.
I could say this. I've submitted myself to this kind of scenario countless hundreds of times in the last decade. And there's not many that I can remember where I could say genuinely, I enjoyed it. And I don't know even why. But this has been particularly compelling. And you might have noticed I rose to the occasion. And I don't know what I'm going to do to cool out now, except walk around the farm, look at the sheep, and have them ignore me.
Be prepared to stop.
Yes, sir.
Thanks very much, Stephen.
And thank you to you too.